meaning when things don't go right in your life, when you have a bad day at work, when you have a bad day with your spouse, when your sports team loses, are you still okay with where things are going? Because at the end of the day, it's just small stuff compared to the fact that you one day will spend eternity with the God of the universe. Hey, welcome to this week's edition of Ask the Pastor. This is our weekly segment where we expand upon our Sunday message and kind of answer questions that are maybe on your mind and more in depth for the story, or how do we apply this to our lives. This week, we just wrapped up a 9-week series through the life of Joshua, where he led a nation of Israel from wandering around a wilderness, 2 million people, into this promised land that God had been promising his people literally for hundreds of years. And as he does this and they conquer and they win all these battles, you read the book of Joshua, it is just gory and crazy and awesome all in one. But the end of this book ends with Joshua charging the nation of Israel, asking the same question over and over again. He asks them 3 times and they respond the same way 3 times, is who will you worship? He says, who will you worship? And the question that I think for us comes up that we need to answer is, who are we worshiping? And maybe more specifically, how do I know who I'm worshiping? Because on the surface level, this seems like an easy question. If you are a Christian and you go to church, clearly you think you're worshiping Jesus. I hope you are. If you go to a mosque and you identify as Islam, then you are worshiping Allah. Hindu, Buddhist, if you're Jewish, there are gods associated with all those different religions. Even if you go into New Age, or if there's an atheist, you say, clearly, I don't worship a God. But from our perspective, say you identify as a Christian, you say, I'm a Christian, you go to church, how do you know you're truly worshiping God? Because Joshua said this to people who are supposed to be worshiping Yahweh, the God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, the one we know as Jesus. They were supposed to be worshiping him, but he challenged them because they had false gods in their midst. How do we identify our false gods? They're everywhere. And I think the first question we need to ask is, how do we know who we worship? Is what do we spend our time, our energy, and our passion focusing on? I know for one, I have a big kind of issue of devoting too much of my time, my energy, my passion into my sports teams. That sounds so stupid. That sounds so small. But if you're honest, so many of you can identify the same way. I follow my teams on Twitter. I listen to podcasts about them. I watch every single game. I can organize my life easily around making sure I am on my couch watching my team play a game. And we all have those things in our life. Whether it's social media, whether it's our jobs, whether it's our path of our career, you can be worshiping your family. And the idea that if you just have a perfect family, that your wife or husband is who you want them to be, that your kids are turning into people, that you can worship that rather than worship your God. And here's what I think we need to ask ourselves is then, okay, where am I spending my time, my energy, my passion? That's my first question I ask. But then also, is who am I relying on? Go back to my sports analogy. My favorite team is the Phoenix Suns, and then depending on season, Cardinals, ASU can go in from Arizona. When my team loses, does my mood change? And is my mood dependent on the news I get about my team? And I'll be honest, there's times it is. And we all have those things that honestly it's pathetic and we should be ashamed of to a degree, but we also need to be honest about. Is when you worship God, if you're worshiping Jesus, meaning when things don't go right in your life, when you have a bad day at work, when you have a bad day with your spouse, when your sports team loses, are you still okay with where things are going? Because at the end of the day, it's just small stuff compared to the fact that you one day will spend eternity with the God of the universe. Or are you dependent on the emotions of everything else, the other gods you are worshiping around you being right in order for you to be right inside? And this leads to the last thing of then what do we devote our lives to? Because I think it's, okay, how do we spend our time, our energy, our passions? What do we depend on? Meaning, how do we let our emotions go forward or back depending on how that thing changes? And lastly, what do I ultimately devote my life to? And this is, I think, that kind of final piece of worshiping, meaning, is your life revolved around and is your life organized to serve and worship that Meaning your job, is it merely a vessel to tell people about who Jesus is? Is your family merely a vehicle to worship that God, to love that God, and tell more people about them? And all of a sudden, all those things that are good things in our life, they get knocked down a priority because they are not your gods. Instead, they either support your worship of God or they are vehicles to share with other people about that. And when you start to answer these questions honestly, and you start to do a deep dive in your life, then we can be like the people of Israel at the end of the book of Joshua. And we can say, no, I don't have false gods in my life. I will throw them away. I won't bend to what my culture around us has. I won't fall prey to the things around me, but I will worship my God. I hope you're answering that question and you're declaring that statement in your life today.